The bucket struck the porch plank once and sloshed when Asher Keel caught it with both hands. Wind dragged a sheet of dust across the yard and left a tall silhouette at the gate. She stood a full head higher than any rider he had seen on that road, a young Comanche woman, broad in the shoulders and long in the leg, past 18 by the lines in her face and the way she took pain without apology. A broken arrow shaft poked through the top seam of her buckskin sleeve, and her breath came shallow, as if the sky had been pressed hard against her ribs. He set the bucket on the step and walked to the gate with his rifle carried muzzle down the way a man carries a promise. Her right palm rested on the top rail, and her weight bent it a fraction. He saw the careful strength in that hand and the tremble she tried to hide. "Water," she said with the sand still in her mouth. He dipped a tin cup and held it out. Her knuckles brushed his fingers, and the cup shook as she drank. A drop silvered her chin. "Ash wind," she murmured, lost in dust. "Far from my people," he answered without asking for name or story. "Come through," and the old hinge gave a cry that sounded like the place was surprised to be merciful. He led her under the cottonwood that split the yard. He cut the shaft short without pulling it free and bound her shoulder with clean muslin. She sat and took the binding without flinch and said her name low into the shade. Tala, the sound, soft but taller than the tree that covered them. She touched the cloth and nodded once. "I will pay." He shook his head. "Not today. Not this?" She looked at him full and measured, a heavy thing for a man to say on the rim of rancher land. He said, "I worked fence enough years to know what keeps wolves out and what keeps men in. Today a door, not a wall." Heat drove the morning forward and held the blue bowl of sky steady. Asher cut 2 strips of jerky and a heel of yesterday's bread and placed them in her good hand. He saw how she watched his eyes and not his mouth, like a person who had lived under rules that split a man between what he said and what he meant. She ate slow to make it last and watched the horizons as if people lived just beneath them. He said, "You alone," she said. "I walked away from a quarrel where pride made knives of words and knives made tongues hold still. I walked to cool my head and lost the track. I am not a child and not a thief." He said, "I can see both." At noon, the road threw up a rider in a deputy's hat, and 3 men who smelled like the inside of a saloon even from the gate. The deputy hoisted his badge like a spoon in bad soup and called across the wire, "You harbor hostiles, you open yourself to a noose." The youngest of the 3 stroked his carbine like a pet. Asher stepped into the road seam with his own rifle still down, and the sun made a hot coin of the front sight. "I harbor the thirsty," he said, "the way a man says a creed." The deputy looked past him at Tala and found the size of her. His lip thinned to a string. He said, "Big girl, there belongs to the fort." Tala stood with the binding white on her arm and the calm on her face. She said, "I belong where my feet are set." The youngest raised the carbine a finger, then lowered it under the deputy's palm. Asher put a round into dust at their horses' toes. Gravel jumped like fleas. No blood, only a line. "Move on," he said. The deputy spat and rolled his horse. "We will be back at dusk with men who put law in a straight coat." He answered that a straight coat makes a poor fit for a crooked day. They left a smell of sweat and cheap talk behind them. The dust swallowed it. Asher brought Tala to the porch and set her in the shadow of the beam. He fetched a biscuit from a tin. He said, "You watch while I water the herd." She pushed herself up and said, "I do not sit while a man sweats on my account." He said, "The doctor in me says sit. The fenceman in me says watch." She nodded and took the watching because it felt like work. He moved along the troughs and the day bent around them, with the quiet of labor done under a worry. In the hot hour, the hills carried a different kind of silence. The horses in the far pen lifted their noses and tasted air. A point of light winked from the western ridge, and then another from the south as if the sun had broken into careful shards. Tala's shoulders rolled back, and she breathed like a person hearing her name from a distance. "My people," she said without pride or fear. Her eyes walked the edges. "They see us. They count us. They weigh your door against the long road." Asher felt the weight come down on his yard. He had known the kind of being watched that men do with their mouths. This was older. This had the patience of trees, he said. "You told me they would not be far," she said. "I told you the truth." He said, Then we will tell them ours with our hands and our faces." The sun dropped like a lid, and the deputy returned with 6 men and a talk that had grown meaner on the ride. They halted at the gate and never crossed it. "A small mercy," the deputy called, "hand her over. Asher said she stays tonight." The deputy's mouth went white again. He said, "You aim to make a church out of a shack and a court out of a corral." Asher fired into air, and the sound made the cottonwood leaves clap their hands, warning only. The men flinched in the way a man hates to when other men can see it. The deputy glared as if glares could burn like coal. In the dark beyond the yard, a horse snorted and a click answered. That was not white men's iron. The deputy found sense and left it be. "We come back," he said, and rolled off with his little train. The silence that filled their absence had a different shape. It held painted lances and watchers' eyes, and the way a night keeps men honest, Asher put a lantern on the porch, but left its hood half down so faces could be seen, but not shouted at by the light. Tala sat with her back against the post, and the line of her collarbone looked like a ridge under moonwater. She said, "I am not a prize and not a burden." He said, "I see a person who crossed hard ground to cool, hot words." She said, "The elder with the frost hair and the pipe will lead the circle. He will speak slow and sharp. He will look at your hands more than your tongue." Asher flexed his fingers and saw in them the years of fence and rope and hammer. "I will keep them open, unless I must lift iron to teach a line." She nodded as if the answer had passed a test. She said, "My name is taller than I am." My mother laughed when she gave me Tala for how the wind at birth took the smoke straight up. He said, "My birth took a woman straight down and left my father with a child and a herd." She looked at him the way a person looks at a tree scar, and understands storm. Without needing to see it, dawn crawled in on its elbows and showed what the ridges had gathered. Riders lined the shoulders of the land. Lances lifted and fell with the horse's breath. The paint on faces was not war's shriek, but judgment's mask. Red earth and white clay, and a dark line like a river across a cheek. An old man with hair the color of winter grass rode to the gate and dismounted the slow way of a man who did not need to be quick to be first. He set his pipe across his forearms and looked at the ground. He said words Tala carried to Asher in even syllables. "Elder Quiet Thunder asks if you made that woman small or if she made you large." Asher said, "I saw a person and made a door." Taylor spoke that in a tongue that touched stone and came back warm. The elder nodded once. He drew a circle in the dust with the bowl of his pipe and set a small hoop of willow inside it. He said, "Step when the air asks you, not before, not after," Tala said. "They will call this noose of breath. They will see if you choke on it or breathe through." Asher felt the fence wires hum at his back. He saw 3 townsmen on the road, the deputy among them, and he saw how the deputy wanted any excuse to trade breath for blood. They formed 2 half-moons around the gate, Comanche on the hills and in the yard's lip, townsmen on the roadside with hands too near their belts. Tala stood between worlds. Her height made the air on both sides settle. Elder Quiet Thunder spoke again without looking at the deputy. He asked, "How did you touch her shoulder? How did you aim your thunderstick? How did you speak your water?" Asher answered one by one with cloth and clean into dust and not into flesh. With a hand that did not own, the elder's mouth made a small shape that might have been respect if the day had not been so hard. The deputy cut in like a dull knife. "Enough of this," he yelled. "Law is not a drum circle." Asher turned his head to him and said, "Go easy. This is a court, whether you like its roof or not." The deputy put his hand halfway to iron and held it there when 5 lances turned an inch in his direction. Tala's voice held the room that had no walls. "Be still," she said to the road. "Be still long enough to hear the weight of your own boot on another man's neck." The elder set the test. He walked the hoop to the gate and lowered it to the ground where the dust held the perfect circle. He lifted his pipe and drew a second circle around the first, with the tip like a trace. He said, "Step inside the hoop with both open hands and lay your iron in the circle next to your feet. Speak your house word. Promise to keep and to be kept." Asher saw the deputy's grin sharpen and turn hungry. The rancher felt the cold level of decision move through him like creek water. He stepped forward. He set the rifle down inside the hoop with the muzzle pointed into dirt, as if it were a root and not a branch. He opened his hands and put them up so the working lines and the torn places showed. He said in a voice that carried to both hills, I take her as a guest without price for one night, and any man who takes her from me by force without a word will find the dirt speak against him." The elder listened but did not answer. He turned to Taylor. He asked questions that ran like water over rock. Taylor faced her own people with a spine that knew work. She said, "He bound my shoulder like a brother. He called me woman and not a thing. He fired dust and not flesh. He did not ask for my name to put it on a chain." And then she did the hardest thing. She said with the low steadiness of someone who would not bargain with her own blood, "If he lies, I will speak first against him." The youngest hot blood among the riders, paint bright like a wound of pride, urged his pony down the slope and planted his lance butt hard. He rapped it against Asher's rifle barrel to see if he could make a man flinch. "Asher did not," he said softly. "Hand off, brother. We are speaking." Quiet thunder let it go. One heartbeat, then snapped a word that cracked like a stick. The young man flared his nostrils and pulled back a pace. "Judgment is a rope that breaks if fools lean on it," Tala translated without adding her own sting. Even so, the words pulled heat from the young man's ears. From the road, the deputy tried again to turn the sky. He said, "You sit in the dirt and play with hoops, while a white man breaks the law." The elder raised his pipe and his gaze, but still did not look at the deputy. He asked Asher about the fence, what it kept in, what it kept out. Asher said it held cattle to grass and held men away from their worst selves. He said, "A fence is a promise if a man stands next to it with his palms open." The elder grunted low, and something like approval walked past his mouth and did not stay. He reached into a bag on his belt and drew out a narrow strip of rawhide braided with 3 strands and caught by a brass button pounded flat from a cartridge shell. 3 colors ran the braid, river clay red, ash white, and a sky thread blue. He said, "This tied to your gate speaks that you have guessed right for 1 moon and 1 more. Raiding eyes will look away." But he did not smile because gifts have teeth. Tala said, "The cost, elder. What does the gift take?" The old man rolled the rawhide between his fingers. He said, "1 thing for 1 thing. The man keeps water open to clan women and children who come with this sign tied to their chest. He brings word to the ridge if soldiers ride hard and stupid. He does not sell what we tell him free." The deputy barked a laugh that wanted to be brave and fell thin. "So now you work for them," he sneered. Asher kept his eyes on quiet thunder and not the mouth. He said, "I work for the day. This yard does not turn people into objects." The deputy said, "I call that treason." Asher said, "I call that good carpentry, making a door where men cut a hole. If you were standing with your rifle laid in a stranger's hoop, and both sides waiting to name you friend or coward, what would you do? And if stories like this tie you to the old roads, subscribe and ride with us again, because the next bend always holds a choice." A man from town tried to spoil the moment with his own noise. He stepped past the deputy and kicked the hoop like a bully with a tin pail. He said, "No, red cutthroat judges a white homestead." Before the last word dried, Asher moved, not violence. A quick hand, he snatched up his rifle by the warm barrel and slapped the man's shin with the wooden butt. A child's correction on a grown fool. The man yelped and hopped back, and the hoop settled in the dust whole and unbroken. Quiet Thunder allowed himself a thin smile that said a boy had been caught stealing apples and made to put them back. Tyler's mouth went soft for 1 second and then strong again. She said to Asher low, "You gave him a small hurt to stop a large one. That is the right size of pain for a day like this." Quiet Thunder raised the rawhide strip, and the clan hummed in a sound like wind inside a canyon. He tied the braid to the gate latch with his own hands and pressed the brass flat with his thumb. He spoke, and Tala carried the words, "For 2 moons, this place is under our eye and our mercy. Any who come with hate find the land heavy under them. Any who come with need find a cup and no price." He turned to the road without bowing. "You break what we have made with law tricks, and we answer in the places where law has no breath." The deputy paled and found that his mouth had less courage than it had a minute ago. He backed his horse and hissed at the townsmen to move. The riders poured back to the ridges without dust, proof of discipline and not panic. Tala stood in the gate as if holding the day up between her hands. She was giant again in the right way, large enough to shade a decision. Asher retrieved his rifle and checked the chamber and laid it back on the porch rail, muzzle down. He faced the deputy. "You ask if I am still one of you," he said. "I say I am the part of you that keeps a neighbor from becoming a story told over beer about a body and a rope. You can hate me and still live because I aimed at dust today, The deputy shook like a dog out of a creek and pretended it was anger. He rode off in a spray of small gravel and pride. The yard took a breath it had not held since morning. Tala breathed with it. She eased herself to the porch step and set her long forearms on her knees and let the binding rest. She said, "The cost is not finished." Asher said, "Costs that end are prices. This is a promise." She looked at him and found not romance, but a seat she could sit on without it breaking. She said, "My mother will come tonight and speak to me with her eyes first, and then her mouth. She will ask if I was a fool or a woman," he said. "Tell her you were both because the day requires both." She let one laugh escape the strong place inside her, and then she covered it because some joys should not be counted by crowds. That evening lanterns flowered along the ridge like stars had decided to touch dirt. 3 elders and 2 women came down soft. The women wore striped blankets and their hair was braided tight against the wind. One was Tala's mother, by the way. Her eyes went to the bandage and not the rifle on the rail. They spoke in low music. Tala answered in the same river. After a time, the mother turned to Asher and spoke 3 words. Tala carried them. "Thank you, man." The mother lifted his hand and set it down again. A blessing without a church. Quiet Thunder sent a younger woman to tie a small feather to the rawhide braid. Not a war sign, but a house sign, notched in a pattern that said 2 moons without asking the moon to agree. 2 days later, Cost came from the White Road as expected. The mercantile told Asher his account had cooled. The bank said his note had grown teeth. Asher stacked his anger neat and tight and spent it on fence posts because a man should not spend that coin on mouths. Tala took a needle and mended what she could mend around the house and did not spend her dignity to pay for anything. She asked no favor and offered skill. She milled corn with the old stone and made a thin cake that held together better than the day. They ate by the gate under the braid like 2 workers on break, not like a man and a saved thing, and that mattered. In the hot side of the week, 4 soldiers rode from the fort with campaign hats, and a sergeant who had lived long enough to be tired of stupid. They dismounted and found the braid at the latch and read it the way a man reads a face and not a paper. The sergeant said, "You have an arrangement I do not understand." Asher said, "I have an arrangement that keeps bullets out of meat. You want to break it?" The sergeant looked at Tala and saw the size and the set of her jaw and the adult in her. He turned his horse by the reins and said, "I am going to find an arrangement I can write down that means nearly the same thing." He left without thunder, just relief. And that too was a kind of courage. The second evening brought a different test. 3 boys from town tried to show off to each other by cutting the braid. They crept into the yard with cheap knives and hearts beating like rabbit legs. Tala heard the fence sing when a hand touched it. She moved like a tree that had decided to walk. Asher moved with her. He took the knives without blood and broke 2 blades in his bare hand by the hinge and gave the pieces back. He said, "Take these home and tell your fathers you failed to become men today, and that this is why you will live long enough to try again." The boys ran and he let them. Tala watched him, and the line of her mouth said that not all justice uses rope or iron. At the end of 1 moon, Quiet Thunder returned with 4 riders and a girl who carried a water skin and a boy who carried a bag of parched corn. The elder retied the braid with a new knot and added a bead the color of sage. He spoke the count. 1 more moon, he said, and then you stand on your own feet without our shadow. Tala stood next to him and did not look at Asher while the words were bound, because some bonds need privacy to tie. When the elder finished, he took tobacco from his pouch and pinched it into Asher's palm, not as a license, but as a taste of something shared. Asher took a breath and tasted smoke and age, and the truth that comes when men stop trying to win every room. This is a thing 2 adults made so that when men with hats and men with braids both look here, they see a price printed plain. The price is respect and the cost is gossip and hunger. When you offend the wrong merchant, he touched the strap and felt horsehair bite his skin just enough to belong. He said, "I will pay the cost." She said, "Good. Do not forget to live the reward," when winter came down in a clean sheet and put white music on every strand of wire. Asher warmed his hands over a fire that smelled like cottonwood sap and looked at the strap over the gate and at the rawhide braid over his hearth. He felt a widening where other men feel a narrowing. He walked the rooms of his house and fixed the latch on the pantry and oiled the hinges on the bedroom door and laughed once at himself for oiling a hinge he had not used to let anyone in for years. Tala rode in that night with 2 women and a child and a man whose arm had met a clumsy axe. They slept in the bunk room, and the fire made one room out of the house and the barn and the ridge. He watched the child sleep with one hand on the dog's neck, and he thought that sometimes a trial teaches you where to put your hands. In spring, the deputy lost his badge to a man who preferred quiet to speeches, and the store gave Asher back his account, and the bank learned that some notes pay on time when the town stops tugging at their tails. Asher planted beans with a patience that felt like prayer without any preacher in it. Tala came less often because peace has its own errands. When she came, they stood with arms on the top rail and looked at clouds until they had sorted the ones that brought rain from the ones that brought talk. He asked once, "You ever think of living in a house with walls I built too close?" She looked at him and set her big hand on his shoulder. "I live where my people live," she said, "and my people live in circles and lines both. If there is a day when the circle passes through your line and stays there, we will set our bowls side by side and eat without counting bites. Until then I am a hinge and you are a door that learned to be a bridge." He laughed without sound, and that felt like being a man who had not been alone for a long time. He hung the rawhide braid where the fire could see it and the smoke could read it. He kept the strap above the gate bright with tallow so the quills would not crack. He sent word to quiet thunder when soldiers rode stupid, and he filled a cup without price for women who came with dust on their skirts and a token at their throats. He found that honor was not a story he told himself to sleep at night. It was a ladder he carried that other people climbed to reach a thing they needed. Sometimes they looked down and thanked him, and sometimes they climbed without a word, and he learned that thanks and no thanks weigh the same if the job gets done. In the end, the trial that began at his gate judged him one day at a time, and he kept passing because he kept choosing the same thing. A door over a wall, mercy over the clean blankness of minding his own business. And he paid for it with accounts and stares and sometimes a hard quiet at the table. The return was a fence that hummed like a harp when the wind ran right, and a horizon that felt wider than the pages of his title. If this kind of courage and cost sits right in your chest, ride with us again, subscribe and keep company on these old roads. And if you want the fire to burn a little taller for the next tale, throw a small stick on our flame and we will turn it into another night you can lean into.